This is the world, around and revolving some amazing man-made satellites, launched into space from Soviet Russia. What sort of human effort first produced these satellites? What sort of people? What sort of nation? Recently, some motion pictures were made in that nation, about which we know so little, by a man from the Western world, and here he is, Mr. Sid Fetter. He has a proper passport, tickets issued by Intourist, the Soviet government travel agency, and a new long-focus zoom-R lens, which he's not quite sure he knows how to operate. And here he is in Russia. Here I am, he says to himself, actually taking motion pictures in a country which for so long has been forbidden Russia. My transportation has been arranged, my permits are all applied for, and I hope I brought along enough film, because I want to take back home a photographic record of everything I'm going to see. Let's pretend I'm Mr. Sid Fetter, just arrived in Moscow. En route to my hotel, I recognize the Cathedral of St. Basil, built by Ivan the Terrible, who, legend says, had the architect's eyes put out so he wouldn't ever surpass this achievement. Passing the famed historical museum, I arrive at the Hotel Moscow, the newest in the city, and mostly reserved for visiting delegations, mainly from other Iron Curtain countries. I find military and political MVD police patrol the hotel main entrance. As a matter of fact, they watch all entrances and exits, day and night. Here, Intourist provides me with a deluxe 5-room suite, but I'm no sooner in it than I learn that not only my schedule, but every detail of my Russian visit must conform to Intourist pattern, down to when and where I eat my meals. On the streets, it's apparent that everyone must carry identification papers, since no one knows when the MVD will ask for them. Present everywhere is the state-owned ice cream cart, despite Moscow winter temperatures of 30 below. The main thoroughfare, Gorky Street, is crowded with pedestrians, including visitors of 1 million a day from all over Russia. Official visitors, all of them, for it seems no Russian may travel except with official permit which states where he can go and what he can do. In summer, the Moscow floating population climbs to 2 million. The government ice cream cart really does business, for it's hot here, even though Moscow is on the same parallel as Sitka, Alaska. These Russians, plus the thousands of men in uniform, all give the Moscow street scene an exciting aspect of fantasy. I begin to wonder just what Russia is. Already I've learned that the 260 million Soviet people speak some 300 different dialects, that they publish newspapers in 119 different languages, and that more than half of them are not Russian at all. Many of the automobiles are Kremlin cars, and since the chauffeurs work for the state, the pedestrian learns to keep out of the way. Prominent in Moscow is the state-operated department store, the GUM, spelled G-U-M, pronounced GUM. My visit to the GUM is chaperoned by an Intourist guide interpreter. Her name so complicated, I promptly christen her Miss Moscow.
First on your schedule, Mr. Fetter, is the very newest department in the GUM. That is why there is a long line of waiting customers. But with your special permit, you will not have to wait. This project is under the supervision of the Department of Culture. A fashion show. Like women everywhere, we are eager to see the new style. All these creations are Russian designs and Russian models.
But from the faces, the sales seem beyond the comprehension of the customer. The state food stores are called the gastronome shops. I found no shortage of food in Moscow, except perhaps for meat and eggs. Things like clothing, house furnishings, and appliances are in short supply, so the Moscow worker has rubles to spend freely for food. But there's a special routine to make a purchase. You locate what you want, you stand in line to learn if it's available and how much it costs. Then you queue up in another line and buy that particular food ticket from a cashier. Then you line up again and you acquire the desired food. Unless what you've selected has been sold out in the meantime. In which case you stand in another line at the cashier's to get your money back. The bookkeeping is kept straight by the ancient abacus. I asked Miss Moscow where these people live.
Many of them live in our skyscraper apartments, but this is Stalin architecture and has been permanently abandoned for something better.
The full truth was once printed in Moscow. The plaster is falling off, the plumbing disastrously out of order, and the elevators rarely operate. It seems the basic construction was faulty. But behind these lofty cockle shells is hidden the living pattern for a great mass of Moscow's population. Narrow streets, lined with apartment houses. The cobblestones all too often trod by the frequent tragicomic drunkard. The apartments all too apparently occupied 3 or 4 to a room 9 by 12 feet, with cooking, washing, and toilet facilities in a community hallway. But prominent are the thousands of antennas on the rooftops. I have no in-tourist chaperone here, but later Miss Moscow mentions that the city will soon have 1 million television sets, and the newest models have a giant 12-inch screen. In one of these districts, a group of Jews recently ventured to identify their house of worship by placing over the entrance in Hebrew the words, "This is a house of God." And so far, the synagogue has been permitted to remain operative. Later, I asked all through Russia how many Jews are left in Russia, but I couldn't get even a vague estimate.
Start today, Mr. Feder, with the Moscow subway. Remember, only the stations may be filmed. You will please notice, as you see them, that each of the palatial stations has been designed in a different style by a different architect.
Palatial is the word she uses, and I agree with her. Some stations are so deep underground that I descend in 2 flights of fast escalators. I'm beginning to notice that Russian crowds are incredibly quiet and orderly. More than that, somber, expressionless. The subways are all immaculate.
The cleaning is done 24 hours a day.
Always by women?
Yes, Mr. Feder. Come, here is our train.
It takes us to the end of the line, way out here in the Moscow suburbs. There are still a few of the colorful and lovely old-style cottages left from the Tsarist days. The doors carved in wooden tracery and potted plants in the windows. But most of Moscow's suburbs are little more than log cabin shacks, reflecting the acute housing shortage.
Yes, Mr. Feder. We need many houses. So here we are building new apartments. Not Stalin architecture, but put together in a new kind of prefabricated construction. Large completed sections weighing many tons are hauled in by truck and lifted into place by giant cranes.
Yes, and the buildings almost visibly rise toward their ultimate 20-story height. The finishing process involves hand labor with good old-fashioned bricks, and women are doing the work. I simply have to ask, where are the men workers, and what are they doing?
The men are engaged in a more productive type of labor.
Another subway ride next morning. Miss Moscow didn't show up today, replaced by a young in-tourist guide who thus becomes Mr. Moscow.
This is Moscow University. It is the world's largest, with 26,000 students from all over the Soviet Union. And for instance, Mr. Feder, turns out more engineers every year than any in your Western world. I graduated from here myself, majoring in Oriental languages, including the Chinese.
In-tourists insist that I see the start of the all-Russia bicycle race. Moscow to Smolensk, to Minsk and back. 8 full days of pedal pushing, with teams entered from each of the 16 Soviet republics.
You see, we train their bodies as well as their minds. You recall the Olympic Games?
I recall all right. And it's obvious that what he says is true. Young Russia is healthy, husky, athletic-minded, and dedicated in their desire to be champions, which automatically brings the highly privileged first-class citizenship. Mr. Moscow is eloquent about his alma mater.
In Russia, we graduate 500,000 university students every year. And these of Moscow University are, of course, the cream of the crop.
What do these youngsters want to do when they graduate?
They want to compete with the rest of the world on an equal basis.
Yes, in Russia today, the emphasis is all on education. Science, engineering, physics, yes. But of other things. Of the outbreak of the Hungarian revolt, for instance, they could learn from the official Moscow bulletin only this. Capitalist-inspired rowdy students created minor disturbances in Budapest. The world-famous Bolshoi Theater is operated by the Soviet Department of Culture. Tickets must be purchased weeks in advance, but special courtesies are extended to local and foreign dignitaries and the rare Western visitor like myself. Built by the Tsars, the Bolshoi is still synonymous with ballet in all its original graceful patterns. I slip backstage during intermission, unchaperoned, and find Bolshoi artists as gracious and responsive as theatrical folks are elsewhere. Bolshoi artists are never called stars. They are designated favorites of the people, and some are bigger favorites than others. One of the most popular ballerinas is charming and friendly. She speaks a little German, and so do I. She's heard about the famous ballet institutions everywhere. The Royal Danish, the Sadler's Well. But when somebody tells her I am backstage without official permission, she suddenly forgets all her German and hurries away. Next day, back to the university stadium to see the big football game. This new Lenin Stadium is proclaimed as the largest in the world. For today's championship soccer game, Moscow University versus Kiev University, equivalent to the American Rose Bowl Classic, the stadium is jammed with 120,000 lucky football fans. Look at them. I don't understand. Are they all suspense stunned in silence waiting for the kickoff? No, because the game is at its hectic climax. 2 minutes to play, the score 1-0, and Kiev frantically trying to tie it up. But here again, the faces I see are somber, expressionless, apathetic. Have you ever stepped out for an evening in a government-owned nightclub? Moscow is openly proud of the metropole and its plush elegance. The orchestra plays Russian music part of the time. cigarette cart, state-owned, also dispenses apples, magazines, ice cream, and books. The heavy spenders are the delegation visitors from the Far East, officially inspecting Moscow nightlife. Most of the time, the music is good old American jazz. And when jazz is played, cafe society stays late, when they can afford it. For the metropole is expensive in any money. The orchestra players are all government employees working for the Department of Culture. Another important in-tourist must in Moscow is the agricultural exhibit, a permanent fair or exposition. This 500 acres of land, of parks, fountains, the 16 individual pavilions representing the 16 Soviet republics, this I find is a preview to show the full potential of the Russian tomorrow. Although the pavilion of the Ukraine, for example, already exhibits several models of Russia's most modern farm machinery, as used in that famous breadbasket of Europe. Next day to the Kremlin with Miss Moscow.
Ever since 1955, Mr. Feder, the Kremlin gates have been open to visitors, but only with special permits, and we must enter through the official visitors' gate. Now our privileged visitors may have a good look at the Cathedral of the Annunciation. And here is the Assumption Cathedral of Ivan the Terrible. Through that door, many tsars have passed for their coronation.
I ask about an ancient fresco above that door. Isn't it a painting of the Virgin Mary?
The famous cathedrals are all here just as they were, Mr. Feder. Of course, no religious services are conducted in any of its churches. They are now historical showplaces which belong to the people. And inside, they are educational museums.
Among the other relics of Tsarist days is the largest cannon in the world. And nearby, the largest bell in the world. The former Uluzheniya Palace is now the Armory Museum. Inside, I managed to photograph a few of the late Romanov vast treasures. Precious metal in such profusion, it begins to seem like brass and tin, but happens to be solid gold and silver. The jeweled crowns and imperial paraphernalia of the Tsars are here. And another curious paradox. Carefully preserved are the holy articles of the Tsar's religious ceremonies. A huge Romanov family Bible, found in heavy sculptured gold, studded with giant diamonds. Similar gold and bejeweled prayer books, chalices, icons, altars, communion cups, crucifixes, with rubies, emeralds, and pearls, all out of the Arabian Nights. And famed relics of the Easter once holy in Russia, the Romanov Easter egg collection, fabricated by the deftest goldsmiths in Europe. Jewel-adorned gold and silver and platinum, enamel and ivory and hand-painted miniatures, perhaps the costliest gadgets of all time. But the number one attraction in Moscow, indeed in all Russia, is Red Square and the incredible paradox of the Lenin-Stalin Mausoleum. Here on this fine, warm summer day, marshaled by white-coated guards, thousands, yes, tens of thousands of men, women, and children line up in silent reverence. At a given signal, edge slowly forward for a precious glimpse of the embalmed bodies of the Soviets' two here acknowledged supreme heroes. Here again is fantastic illustration of the different racial types which constitute Russia's 250 million inhabitants. The white-coated gents are specially trained police, because the many strangers from far-off corners of the Soviet Empire must be handled with care, here where they are to learn the new and different way of life. Lenin and Stalin. Lenin is, of course, a legend, sanctified against all opinions save legend-worthy worship. But Stalin, what is Stalin today? A myth? How long does it take to completely dishonor a mythically glorified idol? And does the Kremlin really want to? His body is still here, beside the sainted Lenin. It's the same on this unpleasant gray winter day, with sleet turned to rain, and the temperature up from 30 below to a mere 10. Yet heads are bared in reverence. It's still Lenin and Stalin here, still the wholesale silent veneration, still the miles of worshipers, still the long, thin line of paradox in the vast, wide sea of enigma. Important people, however, are on arrival taken at once to the head of the line. Like these high dignitaries of the Yugoslav Church. Here, these men of God, to pay holy tribute to two dead men who are famed, among other things, for denying God. This is Russia. Yes, this is Russia, but not all of Russia. Let's visit the Soviet Socialist Republic of Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan is, for one example, a native nomad Uzbek tribesman, endlessly wandering the glaring desert north of Afghanistan. For we're out of Europe now and deep in Central Asia. And the Uzbeks are Asiatics, a Persian, Mongol, Turkish people. For centuries devout Muslims, proud of their own alphabet and language, and devoted to their famed Samarkand bread in its flat, decorated loaves. Uzbekistan is also the fabled city of Samarkand, today almost lost in its own hallowed antiquity, with its monumental ruins of palaces and mosques, originally built by Genghis Khan himself. My in-tourist guide here is Mr. Samarkand, who speaks some English, but brought along Miss Interpreter, a native Uzbek girl and very gracious. They proudly point out the Russianized Asia rebuilding program in Samarkand's huge central square. The Registan, built by Tamerlane, the Iron Cripple. Many of these massive structures were once Mohammedan theological schools or madrasas, with not only classrooms, but living quarters for thousands of Muslim students. For Samarkand was and is a holy territory of the Muslim world. Another ancient landmark has been left intact.
The astronomical observatory of Ulugh Beg, Tamerlane's grandson, partly underground. Its angles and curved walls are very ingenious for the 15th century.
Which prove the Russians were people of science before America was discovered.
But I thought the Russians weren't even here till 1868.
Getting late. Time for lunch.
So we eat in this roadside restaurant. I eat my shashlik quickly. Make the excuse that I want to put the automatic camera on me cooking shashlik with the Uzbek proprietor and his Russian wife, and then wander off, alone, outside. In the mosque, I casually find, in a thickly shaded area, a group of Uzbeks, blandly engaged in the black market sale of meat. Illicitly slaughtered lamb, a serious crime, both the slaughtering and the selling. These folks aren't aware I'm taking pictures. I doubt if any of them knows what a camera is. But one old boy, always behind me, is gradually getting angry. And a few seconds after this scene ends, follows me off, draws an old-fashioned pistol, and pulls the trigger. It doesn't go off, and he suddenly roars with laughter at the joke on himself when he realizes I'm not from the police. But I still get out of there fast. Beyond the Blue Mosque wall, I privately find nearby what is locally believed to be one of the holiest places in Central Asia. For here the Muslims insist that their valiant Saint Zinda will someday return from immortality at this spot to lead the Muslim world to glory. Occasionally a few pathetic Muslim nomads from the desert, afraid to actually enter the town, slip unobtrusively here as a religious pilgrimage. There's always available an old mullah, a Muslim teacher, around to offer up prayers for a small fee, a plaintive sort of bootleg religion. It's here I learn of a Mohammedan mosque operative in Samarkand. I decide to find and visit the Grand Mufti, the head of all the Muslims in the district, at his home. He is entertaining 4 of his mullahs, is cordial, and speaks fairly good English, which helps because I didn't come here with Mr. Samarkand or even Miss Interpreter. I ask if I may attend the Mohammedan service. And on Friday, the Muslim Sabbath, the Grand Mufti himself takes me alone to the sacred confines of the age-scarred mosque. I keep thinking what this kind and gentle old man, 84 years old, said to me before the service.
It is only the old men who can come to prayer. The younger men must work on Soviet schedules. So under the present regime, it's foolish to imagine that any religion can survive as long as the state does not recognize the holy days of any faith. This makes it impossible for us to observe our Ramadan, or the Catholic to observe their Lent, or the Protestant to observe their Sunday, or the Jews to observe their Sabbath. And gone out of all Uzbek Mohammedanism is any hope of the highest aim of every Muslim, to dream that some rare day he might make pilgrimage to the holy city of Mecca. Today, the greatest reward any Muslim may look forward to is an official trip to Moscow. Not the holy Mecca, Moscow.
Next day, the marketplace of Marco Polo is an in-tourist must. Here, in the midst of ancient history, are the new white buildings of Soviet state shops. And here, in the footprints of the Mongol conquerors, walk the MVD police with their modern methods. This Samarkand is now Russia. Around another Uzbek oasis grew up the sprawling Asiatic city of Tashkent. Here I see machinery, road-making machinery, always drawing a crowd of curious Uzbek inhabitants. I ask why women laborers. Mr. Tashkent and Miss Interpreter chat a moment in Russian.
These women are specially trained colonial workers. They go wherever they are needed in any part of Russia. Tashkent has many broad new avenues and modern buildings. And renowned throughout the scientific world is the Tashkent Academy of Sciences.
But only its distant front can be photographed, with the accompanying collegiate statuary glorifying athletic prowess. Tashkent University has its own sports stadium, where its colonial students practice the required and cherished athletics. Everywhere in Tashkent I see Russian soldiers. They're called border guards, and they have their own special uniforms. But Tashkent is 200 miles from the border. The MVD is also here, and this one doesn't seem to like being photographed. They handle everything from traffic control to market inspection. Tashkent is known as Textile Town. And next day, we're to visit a cooperative cotton plantation.
The sign says, the future will be bright for our children if we raise more cotton. The blackboard shows the workers are exceeding their quotas.
We pass through field after field of cotton, being hand-picked, almost all the workers women, Asiatic women. Next, we stop at a state-owned plantation. Here, Miss Interpreter isn't sure I'm allowed to take pictures. I'll have to wait for the supervisor. But before he arrives, I manage to photograph these youthful laborers, some of whom seem below the Soviet minimum child labor age of 16. Miss Interpreter objects.
These are not workers. They are young Soviet citizens learning a trade.
At the textile mill, the supervisor catches up with us. This interpreter translates for him his pride in this project for which he is responsible.
He says the Soviet Union is now independent of the rest of the world in cotton. This mill processes cotton from the raw material which comes in at one end to the printed fabric which goes out the other. This is the largest textile mill in the world.
I ask about visiting the other factories in the area. I'm told there are 7, each employing 12,000 people.
Oh, no, it is not forbidden. But a letter would have to be written and a special permit secured for Moscow. And this would be very difficult.
By now I know this means there's not the barest chance I'll get near those factories. Nor could anyone I met in all Russian Asia tell me what is being made in those factories I couldn't see. As we leave, Miss Interpreter translates a message from the workers for me to take back to the Western world.
Please tell the people of your country that the Soviet citizens of Central Asia do not want war. We are a simple-minded and peaceful people.
This is Russia, ruled from the Kremlin. But there's more, much more of Russia. Let's take a look at the Soviet Socialist Republic of the Ukraine. The good ship Len Soviet is to take me across the Black Sea to the Crimea. My in-tourist ticket provides me with a deluxe cabin, roomy and comfortable. Its radio speaker brings in only the voice of the Kremlin broadcasts, with no switch to turn it off. My fellow passengers seem to be about 70% military. The others I find are scientists, teachers, theatrical folks, workers from all walks of life, being rewarded for some exceptional service to the Soviet state. For them, this voyage is an earned and organized holiday. Anchored off Sevastopol, but completely out of sight of the naval base, large personnel launches take off the lads in uniform. Our next stop, the magical, mythical paradise of regimented vacations, Yalta, the pride of the Red Riviera. Here, Mr. In-Tourist Yalta takes me over.
Our schedule starts with the largest sanatoria in the world. It was formerly a Tsar's summer palace, but is now the official rest resort of the forestry workers of Russia. Almost all our stations have a rest home. This is one of the rooms occupied by the late President Roosevelt during the Yalta Conference. The room is now a dormitory for forestry workers.